The Boy from Yesterday. I hope you're enjoying the story, and if you are, please leave a rating and a review anywhere you can where podcasts are reviewed, and spread the word about the story as much as you can, because we want to share the story with as many people around the world who might enjoy it. And now, Chapter 29, It's All Relative. The first chance they got, Laurel and Tom went outside, claiming to want to see a star constellation in the night sky. Tom was also heading back to the barn apartment to head to bed, and Laurel would go back inside and up to her room, but they couldn't wait to talk about what they had just heard. "Well, I guess that was a little awkward," Laurel said in a loud whisper, closing the back door behind her. "Your Sam is my great-great-great-grandfather." Tom smiled in amazement, but also puzzlement. "It's just so hard to believe. I mean, I thought maybe some folks around here, I suppose even you, would have ancestors coming from my day, but not like this. Who were all the others? Sam wasn't even married yet back home. And all these later generations eventually bring you?" Tom shook his head, trying to just process it all. Laurel shook her head. "I don't know why I didn't think of that sooner, Tom. What does this mean? I mean, if Sam didn't survive his accident, I wouldn't be here now. He must have lived. He had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on. Those cemetery stones said so before they started that weird blurring thing. So isn't that proof?" Laurel said, her eyes widening in excitement. Tom shook his head too, trying to imagine Sam with a wife and baby in his arms. "I never thought of that before. I wanted proof, something to hang my hat on, and that he was going to be all right. I suppose now we have it." Laurel took Tom's hand. "So, does that mean... what does that mean for us?" Tom took Laurel's hand in his. "I don't know. I reckon that means I don't really need to get back after all. It's just that if I don't go back..." "Wait," Laurel said softly. "I know it's hard. It's a hard decision to make. I don't know what I would do if I had to leave my home and everyone I knew to live in a whole different place, a whole different time. I don't think I could give it all up unless..." Tom nodded. "Unless?" "Unless it meant having a whole new life somewhere else, with someone else. I never intended to stay in Chesterfield forever. I knew I would have to leave Gran and Emily and Teej, everyone, eventually. It's just that if I moved away, I could always visit the people I love here, or wherever they were. I know you can't. I know there are reasons to get back, to try to anyway, but there are lots of reasons to still try to go." Tom looked into her eyes and said softly back, "And yet there is one really, really good reason to stay," as he reached up and gently stroked her cheek with the first finger of his right hand. They stood there looking at one another under the moonlight for what seemed a long time, each one thinking and feeling so many different things at once. They both leaned into each other and kissed. This time was longer than the other times. Longer, more passionate, more meaningful. Each considering that now maybe home for them meant being together wherever they were. Finally, Laurel gently pulled away and gave a little laugh. "That's not creepy, knowing I'm your best friend's 3 times great-granddaughter," Laurel teased. "No, ma'am," Tom said, shaking his head and smiling. "I think old Sam would be mighty proud." They kissed again, a bit more passionately, and each could tell where this was leading. But Tom's manners from his time kicked in, and this time he broke away gently. "Now, Miss Laurel, you tempt a man," Tom said. "That had crossed my mind," Laurel said, smiling and blushing a bit. "There's plenty of time for that later, miss," Tom said, but only half meaning it. Laurel sighed. They both realized it was late, and they both needed sleep. "Okay, Mr. Flannery, I understand," Laurel said, "but I'm taking an IOU. To me from you, an IOU for one really, really good kiss under the moonlight, as soon as possible." "I'd sign that," Tom grinned. Laurel winked and pulled her sweater tighter around her body as she turned to go inside. Tom watched her go toward the door and watched her turn back and give a little wave before going inside the door. He went to the barn, sorry he was going to be in there alone, but feeling it was right for the time being, or at least half right. Getting ready for bed inside, Tom had more time to think and take in all this news. He thought about Sam's hair and how that same color of hair flowed on Laurel. There wasn't any more resemblance from there, though. He laughed, picturing Tom's big mustache on Laurel. But then he sobered, not laughing anymore, realizing the tough decision that lay ahead of him. Would he even try to go back now? Did he even want to? Maybe he didn't go back to save Sam if he lived to produce the progeny that led to Laurel, but he would miss the family and friends and life he left behind in the distant time away. He would miss Mary Shiflett for certain. Laurel confused his feelings because he realized he still loved Mary too, and thought he was a fool for not proposing to Mary sooner. His mind and heart were a jumble of conflicting emotions. He decided that sleeping on it would be the best thing, and perhaps things would be clearer by the cold light of morning. But with the smell of Laurel's light perfume still in the air, in his nose or from his clothes, for right now that decision seemed very hard to make. Laurel had gone upstairs to her room. She took off her sweater and let down her hair from its tie. She took off her blouse and hung it up on the hanger behind her door, and she felt her feet kick off her shoes. She slid off her jeans and tossed them into a wicker clothes hamper in the corner of the room next to her closet. She leaned down to pick up her shoes and put them on their shoe rack in her closet when she noticed the carpet catching her eye. There was nothing wrong with the carpet, except that she was seeing through it where her foot was supposed to be. She held her left hand in front of her face and could see that fine. But when she looked down, her right leg faded into transparency just below her knee. She gently tapped her right foot on the carpet, and she could feel the soft carpet, but just not see her leg. She reached down to touch the invisible part of her leg below the knee, but her hand went right on through it. She couldn't even feel it, even though she could feel herself standing on her foot. She looked back at her left hand. It faded as soon as she looked at it, being able to see her dresser right through it, and then it faded back into visibility again. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she felt like she couldn't breathe. She felt her cheeks flush with anxiety. She looked at the fingers of her right hand, and she could see those fine, but her hand was shaking. This was just like the vision she saw at the cemetery, with the writing on the headstones swirling like sand, and the headstones around her disappearing the next moment after she had seen them. Something was definitely wrong. She thought and thought, what could be the matter? It had to have something to do with Tom and this whole thing. Then she realized with horror, if Sam was her ancestor, maybe the doubt about Tom getting back to his time and saving Sam was manifesting as the uncertainty of things in the present time. History was being altered in the present, and if the events of the past could be altered, she would be altered with it. She was starting to cease to exist, and she was the last of her family line. Her mother was dead, and her mother's father was dead, both Sam's descendants. She was all that was left of Sam's bloodline. If Sam died in the past, if Tom didn't get back to somehow save Sam with Marguerite's 21st century medicine, Sam would die in that history and all his bloodline descendants. Every life he touched and his wife and children and all they did would be gone with him. The implications of this were enormous. Who knew how far the implications of Sam's disappearance could go? What were his descendants responsible for? What if they saved others' lives, but now they weren't there to exist to do it? Laurel's head swam with the thoughts, and she sat on the bed and fell back on it with a sigh. She was trying to think of how to tell Tom this, but the house was dead quiet, and she didn't want to move with all the noise in her head. She tried to tell herself to relax. All the memories of every history class she had ever taken suddenly took on a whole new meaning. She realized that all the headstones she had seen in Chesterfield Cemetery had the stories of the lives of real people behind them. It was too much to think about. How could they resolve this? She didn't want to disappear. She didn't want to not only die, but to cease to have ever existed. Something more had to be done with Tom, and they couldn't tell anyone or everyone would panic. They had to discuss it in the morning and plan what to do next. Christian still had the ring, and they still didn't have the magic words to make it work. As scared as she was, she managed to fall asleep, just by realizing that she had to breathe. She had to at least try to sleep, or else she wouldn't be much good helping Tom the next day, which is now more urgent than ever. Some new idea would come to her in her sleep, she thought. She breathed heavily from exhaustion and was soon dreaming. As she dreamed, the voice that called out her name in the dark, that she hadn't heard for weeks, was back again.